Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ta'ala ala sayyid al-mursaleen wa alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we continue on in our reflection on revival in Islam. And we have understood that Islamic revival is not about reform. It's not to change Islam to meet the standards of the time we live in, but it is really to renew the original principles of Islam in a relevant and contemporary way. Okay, so it's the revival, the renewal, ihya, to put life into the principles. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed this ummah with revivalists. And at the head of every generation, there would be somebody or group that would revive the faith. And revival is not necessarily something which is military. It really has something to do with the revival of Islamic thinking, Islamic thought, the revival of the spirit of Islam and the understanding of Islam. And for the most part, the revivalists deal with the thoughts and the theories. The next revivalist that we want to look at, Sheikh Usman dan Fodio, rahimahullah, he is unique. And I personally have found him to be one of the clearest revivalists of the Mujaddids, who not only theoretically changed Islam in his own life and people around him, but he actually instituted Islam. And this is something which is rare. And so his life, his accomplishments are actually something which is an amazing example, left over by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ for the nation. But in order to understand Sheikh Uthman ibn Fodio or Dan Fodio, rahimahullah, who was from West Africa, from Hausa land, we have to first understand the spread of Islam into the West. And this is something that the average Muslim coming from Arabia or Asia or Turkey does not know much about. The people who live in North Africa, in West Africa, in what used to be Andalusia, Spain and Portugal, they understand this history very well. But unfortunately, because our nation is so widespread, that the teachings, the exploits, and the subtleties of Islam in the West has not been understood. So this class, the next two periods that we have, will have to be given over to this great revivalist, and we're hoping inshallah in another class to come, we will deal with the third, and more of the revivalists. But these people are so significant that you cannot just skip over what they're doing. And this man here is so significant. He has influenced so many millions of people, and is not known in many parts of the Muslim world. So it's very important to get this information out properly. So to understand this, we first look at the spread of Islam after the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And when you look at the maps, and this particular map that we are looking at, you will see in the green that the Prophet ﷺ and his companions were able to spread Islam around the Arabian Peninsula, and then letters were sent to the kings. So letters were sent to the king of Ethiopia and Egypt and Rome and Persia, Yemen, and other different parts of the Arabian Peninsula. And with the response of Persia to attack and the response of Rome to attack, the Muslims then were forced to go forward to meet them militarily. The original thought was not military confrontation. The letter, and this is a very key point, the letters sent out were invitations. It was invitations to Islam. And as the last prophet, he was given the responsibility, to take the message out. And he said to his followers in his final sermon, let all those who are present in Arafat take this message to those who are not here. Now, it was the job of the Sahaba to take the message to the four corners of the earth. And it's interesting to note that the majority of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ did not die in Hijaz. They did not die in what is now known as Arabia. They actually died outside, on the road, in other countries, sometimes in other continents. Because this is what the concept was, to take the message out so that at least the rest of humanity could be exposed to this final message. Even though it was in Arabic language, it was meant for all of humanity and the jinn. And so the followers went out, and when the Romans attacked from the north, Muslims responded. Even in the life of Prophet ﷺ, they threatened with 100,000 warriors, and the Prophet went out to Tabuk, waiting for them, and they never showed up. So this is called the Battle of Tabuk, although the Romans did not appear because Allah put fear in their hearts, and they did not come to the battle. But after his time, they began to threaten again. So in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, and Uthman, they had to go forward to deal with the Romans, because this was one of the world powers at the time. And Rome, of course, was situated, as we learned, in what is now Turkey. It was Constantinople. So that was what they called the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. It was not Italians, right? So when the chapter says, the chapter of Rome, Ghulibat Rum, it's talking about Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines. Okay? They were the leaders of the Roman Empire at the time. And so the Muslims responded and found that the Byzantines were oppressing their people, and they defeated them. They defeated them in Syria, Sham, which is all over Palestine, all those regions. And then when they realized of the oppression of the Byzantines, they decided to take all of the Byzantine holdings that they possibly could. And this led them to go across North Africa. So they entered into Egypt under Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anh. He led the forces there, and they met the people called the Berber people, Amazigh. And they are the original inhabitants of North Africa. Okay, the Romans called them Berber. Okay, Berber is not a nice word, actually. It means barbarian, right? You call somebody a barbarian, right? But their name is actually Amazigh. And amongst the Moroccans now, they want to be called Amazigh. They don't want to be called Berbers. But Berber has stuck with them. Berber stuck. Like in South Africa, they say colored people. You know, they have these terms that they use, the Moors of Spain. Moor doesn't mean anything. It just means a person of color. It was Muslims. Okay, so similarly, Berber, was this term for the wild tribes of North Africa. But the Amazigh people were the original people of West Africa, the desert, Sahara, and North Africa. And they're divided into different groups. In the north, because the Greeks were there, the Phoenicians were there, the Romans were there, they had conquered the coastlines, right, from ancient times. And so many of the Berbers in the north, especially in the Rif Mountains, actually have blonde hair and blue eyes because of the Mediterranean contact. Okay? Berbers going a little south are more brownish color. Berbers, deep in the desert are darker skin, and there's different linguistic groups amongst the Berbers. And they have an amazing untold history, actually, because the Sahara Desert, which is now the biggest desert in the world, it used to be a rainforest thousands of years ago. And if the caves that are in southern Algeria and in Morocco, southern Morocco and Libya, there's caves down there, and it shows waterfalls and elephants, lions, animals of other part of Africa, but it turned into a desert. And when you're in a desert, there's nothing you can do to survive. So this is the Sahara Desert. The BBC did a good series on Africa itself. If you want to see a program, Africa, Richard Attenbauer, and there's a section of it called the desert, Sahara. And if you really want to see what a desert is, you will see it's unbelievable what this desert is. So the people who cross the desert have got to be really strong people to cross this desert, because you're walking or you're with a camel. But the first Muslims who came there going across, especially Uqba ibn Nafi', radiallahu anh, they went right across North Africa, and they were fighting the Byzantines. That was not spreading Islam. That's only military confrontation against the Romans. But the merchants, the scholars, the pious people who were traveling with them, they're the ones who actually started spreading Islam. And so it started moving across North Africa. And Uqba ibn Nafi', very important person, right? Certain names take down and study it on your own. Uqba ibn Nafi'. He's a tabi'i, and he's a great leader. And he was being attacked by the Romans from the ocean. They were coming in on boats. And then there were some Berbers who refused to accept Islam. They were idol worshippers, especially a group led by, a woman, who was Kahina, who was, a serious leader. They were attacking them from the mountains. So in order to have a place where they could defend themselves, they established their base in a place called Qayrawan. And Qayrawan is in the present-day Tunisia. Tunisia, right? And this is Masjid Uqba bin Nafi', this masjid. And if you ever get a chance to go to this masjid, it is a really important place. It's in Tunisia. And, it has some of the oldest artifacts in the Muslim world are in here. Because some date way back to the early times, because they preserved it there. And they weren't necessarily conquered by outside enemies that just destroyed everything. And it was Sahnun and many of the great scholars who put together the writings of Imam Malik, it's called Al-Mudawwana. And so it is Al-Mudawwana that is the basis of Maliki Fiqh. Right? So you have Hanafi, right? Abu Hanifa was the oldest of the great Imams. Just around this time, Imam Malik, who was living in Medina, his book Al-Muwatta was the first hadith book, authentic, before Bukhari and Muslim. And one of his students was Imam al-Shafi'i, and Shafi'i improved on the Maliki school of thought, after visiting the Hanafis. And following that was Imam Ahmed of the Hanbali school of thought. But these are the four great Sunni schools, right? The Maliki school, based in Medina, it looked more west. So Egypt, and then Tunisia, North Africa, these were the basis of the Maliki fiqh. And then Andalusia, Imam al-Qurtabi. This is Qurtaba, which is a city in Spain now, right? The Jami Mosque of Qurtaba. Right, Ibn Hazm, so many of the great Maliki, this is where the Maliki work was done. So this is a picture of the inside of the masjid in Qayrawan. So Islam then was established. It's a long story, but I'm going to give you just an overview of it. It was well established there, and a few centuries went by. Islam then in 711, they went across into Spain, right? And then they opened it up, and that became Al-Andalus, right? That was Tariq ibn Ziyad, right? And so under the Umayyads, remember the Umayyad dynasty, they controlled North Africa and Al-Andalus, right? That was under the Umayyad leadership. And of course, they controlled Damascus and Iraq and other places, because they were the Umayyads. They were defeated by the Abbasids. And one of the Umayyads, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, the last of the Umayyads, he escaped from the Abbasids and he went to Spain. And he became the leader of the Muslims in Al-Andalus. They call him the Falcon of Spain, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. and he established a great empire there in Al-Andalus. Okay? But after this is a long history. After 100, 200 years go by, time sets in. And if you don't revive Islam, you can get corrupted. So they started to get corrupted in Spain. And the Christian forces started to come down from the north. Okay? So the Muslims of Al-Andalus then looked across the ocean and they asked for help in Morocco. Okay, in a place called Marrakesh. Right? And this was the base of a group called Almoravidun. Okay? And Almoravidun originally, their leader, the people had become corrupted, and their leader made Hajj and he came back. He went to Qayrawan and he said, please, can you send me somebody who can revive Islam amongst my people? Okay? So they sent him a man whose name was Abdullah ibn Yasin. Okay? Abdullah ibn Yasin. This is another person who some would consider to be a revivalist. Okay, and Abdullah ibn Yasin, which is from the Sousse region of Morocco. Okay, so he was sent by the ulama of Qayrawan. Remember, Qayrawan was the capital of the West, Western Islam, right? So they sent him to revive Islam amongst the Berber people. There's two tribes called Sanhaja and Lamtuna. Okay? And so he was a revivalist, and his intention was to revive Islam amongst them. And he tried his best, but he was rejected, because these people who live in present-day Mauritania, southern Morocco, southern Algeria, these are Berber people, these are tough people, the Amazigh. And also amongst them were Hassaniya Arabs. These are original from the family of Hassan, Ahlul Bayt, and they, speak, perfect Arabic. They migrated there. So there's Hassaniya. And these people are famous in the Muslim world now. They're called Shanaqata. These are the Mauritanians, right? They wear blue, right? And they're great ulama. They're known throughout the Muslim world for their scholarship. So Abdullah ibn Yasin he tried to revive Islam amongst the Lamtuna, and he was rejected. And they were about to kill him. And so the leaders said, go home. And he said, no, I'm going to go south. So he went south. I'll go back to the map. He went south. If you see how the map goes down there, and you can see it takes you down to Ghana and these places below. Then you see the river that is there. That's the Niger River. So Abdullah ibn Yasin, he was first in Marrakesh, and then you see the arrows, he went south there, because he heard that there were people who were interested in Islam, and he went south to do Dawah. And he set up tents, and he had 5 to 7 followers or so, 5 to 7 followers, and they called the tent Ribat, a Ribat. And a Ribat is it's a tent, or it's a fortification, a Ribat. And so they called it, his people, the people of the Ribat, called Murabitun. That's where the name comes from, Murabitun. Okay, the people of the Ribat. And in the Ribat, the Murabitun, and this is how they probably looked, something like this. You could call them Muslim samurais. You know the samurais of Japan? They were like Muslim samurais who were doing Dawah. So they were trained in Islamic studies, trained in, military warfare, and they especially focus on the economy. They're very interested in economic affairs, taxes and zakat. And this is important, because if you think about Marxist-Leninists, how socialists think, right? The most important thing to a socialist is the economy. You can talk about religion, they don't care. They want to know about the money? Is it in the hands of the bourgeoisie or is it in the hands of the masses of the people? Right? The Murabitun also, they were interested in the economy. Marrakesh, they call it. And it was the center of the Murabitun. The Spanish Muslims called them in, and they were weak, and they revived Islam in Spain. So they controlled a huge area, right? This is the Murabitun. And their leader, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, their teachings were, Quran and Sunnah, right? These are the three things they focused on. Calling people to righteousness, repelling evil, injustice, forbidding any taxation not permitted by Sharia. This is the key principle, okay? And in their settlements, this would be like the room of a student. Very simple but beautiful lifestyle that they had there. And the Murabitun, this is how North Africa was looking at the time. And the Murabitun were controlling, all of that area right up into Spain. Okay, and Islam was being revived. Now, looking at Islam in North Africa, okay? Again, this is a long story. But North Africa was connected to West Africa. How was it connected? Because below the Sahara, in this region, down where it says that River Senegal and Niger River, below that river there was the largest gold mine in the world. The largest active gold mine in the world was down there. Okay? So the Malian kings who lived along that river, they had more gold, pound for pound, than anywhere else in the world. And one of their leaders, called Mansa Musa, who's one of the leaders of the Malian kings, they recently did a study. You can Google his name. Say Mansa Musa, right? M-A-N-S-A. And his last name is Musa. And then you Google, who is the richest man who ever lived? Google it. And you will see it's not Bill Gates. It's not the Nizam of Hyderabad. It's not Rothschild. It's Mansa Musa. This is Europeans. Because pound for pound, they had so much gold. Nobody ever had gold like this. When he made pilgrimage to Mecca, he carried 15,000 camels laden with gold. He changed the economy of every country that he reached. Okay? And so this is the area now. What the Muslims did was they set up trade routes. These trade routes take you from Tripoli down into Kanem-Bornu by Lake Chad. The other one goes from Tarhut, from Morocco up the north, Qaidawan to Tarhut, and then down into Gao. And the third one starts in Fez and goes to Sijil Masa, Audagas, and Kumbisali. These are main routes. And it was a really brisk trade of gold. Most of the gold, even the British used to call their gold guineas, right? If you know Shakespearean thing, they call it guinea, right? Because it's from West Africa. Okay, so most of the gold coming up into Europe and even parts of Asia on this side was coming out of here. And so the Muslims then, this also built up the Muslims who were on the trade routes and in North Africa itself. So you could imagine that there would be an amazing history. And I just want to touch on this to give you just a flavor of the history. And one of the great Andalusian geographers, his name is Abu Ubaid al-Bakri. Right? So he writes in the 11th century, he wrote about 3 empires of African Muslim Islam. 3 of them. And it's interesting because these empires will tell you a flavor of practicing Islam. This is how complex Islam was in this part of the world. The first was Takrur. And Takrur was, and if you look back here on the map, you see Takrur on the left? Yeah. So it's over there on that side. That would be Senegal there. And, so Takrur was, completely Islamic. Uncompromising Islam. They wanted to be ruled by Islam completely. Sharia. Today you call them Islamists. Right? You're like dangerous people, man. You want Islam, right? But, it is, some Muslims want Islam to be established. Non-Muslims live in a society, right? Definitely. But the governing rules is Islam. You don't have pigs running around and, people drinking alcohol and whatever. No. Non-Muslims can live in there. You can't force another person to accept your religion. But you can establish the good and forbid evil. So this is an uncompromising rule of Islam. That's one version. Okay? The next version, and there are people coming off this trend. I don't have time to go into the details of this. I'll bring a text in next week if any of you are interested in the details. I'll bring a copy of this book that I wrote, but it's a little bit thicker book. And the next empire was called the Empire of Gao. Okay? Gao, it's mixed Islam. So you mix Islam with the traditional religion. Now that's something that we know about a lot. Like even Christianity have it. Christians now, they believe in Jesus, but they have Easter, right? Easter eggs and rabbits and all that. Christmas, that's mixed Christianity, right? Muslims, in some Muslim countries, they do that too. They believe in Islam, but they look more Hindu than the Hindus. Okay? Gao had the same thing. The king of Gao, he was a nominal Muslim, but he let the people still worship idols. So he was a mixed Muslim. One of their famous rulers named Sanjata Kita. He's like one of the most famous leaders in Mali. And he was a leader. He was an imam during the day, and he was a magician, an obeah man at night. So what he would do is that he would pray to Allah in the day and then kill a black chicken and throw spells at night. So he wants to get both, right? That's mixed Islam, right? And we got a lot of Muslims like that too, right? They look like a Muslim in front of you, right? But if you see they're going to magicians and they're putting spells on people and doing all forms of shirk, when they're not in the masjid. So that's a trend in Islam. It's a trend, okay? And one of their other leaders, Sunni Ali, of a great empire called Songhai, he was another example of this, okay? So that's your first two types. One is uncompromising Islam. The other one is mixed Islam. And the third is when Muslims live under non-Muslims. So when Muslims are a minority and the leader is not a Muslim. Okay? And al-Bakri described the kingdom of Ghana. It's not present-day Ghana. It was a huge place. And he said that in Ghana, there was a royal town, there was non-Muslim, and then there was a Muslim town. Okay? And the Muslims were the artisans, they were scribes, accountants, because they were literate. They had Arabic and everything, and they could connect with the caravans and all that, right? So but they worked under the king who was not Muslim. Okay? And both sides benefited each other. So if you go to the Muslim town, everybody's dressed Islamically, the adhan's going off, madrasa, everything. If you go to the other town, pigs are running around in the street, people are not dressed right, whatever, you're on the other side, you're in the other place, right? But they had the authority over the Muslims, the non-Muslims. But the Muslims learn how to live under non-Muslims and still maintain their own identity. And this is what we try to teach people today. How you live in Canada, how do you live in these countries, right? That you benefit society, society benefits you. The problem is, can you maintain your identity? Because usually Muslims, if they're a minority, they'll get washed, they'll get lost, right, in society itself. But that is the example of ancient Ghana. Okay? That's the third form. All right? And there was one group here called the Jakhanke. And their leader was called Al-Hajj Salim Suwari. And they were a group of merchants, And they focused on three things: qira'ah, which is learning, masjids, madrasa. They used to heal people, make dua for people. They would be called in to make dua. They also believe in farming, and they were believed in safar. They would travel. And as they travel, they do dawah. So there are business people who are traveling doing dawah, right? If you think about Tabligh Jamaat, right? It will come in your mind. It's a trend that happened in India, similar to this. This is West Africa though, right? But you know what's deep about them, now look at their thing. They disavowed jihad. They said no fighting. Because for a business person, you can't do business if you're fighting jihad, right? And they believed in a peaceful dawah. Okay, it's an approach. Like Tabligh, if you go with them, they're not allowed to enter politics in the masjid or the community. They just teach the people and they go. Okay? But this group here, they did long distance trade and business, and they were actually calling non-Muslims to Islam. That's the difference with Tabligh. This group, they're very strong in calling non-Muslims. And it's similar to some of the groups that went into India and Indonesia, right? It was the Sufis. It was people who were merchants and whatnot. They didn't go in there to fight. They didn't go business. And some ulama came with them, you know, and spiritual people. And that's how Islam spread in Indonesia. Even the Rohingyas that we're studying this weekend, that's how it spread amongst the Rohingyas. That's how it spread in Kerala. That's how it spread in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in the Maldives, Indonesia, that whole basin there. It was not armies that went into there. Okay? So this is the same trend that you see in other parts of the Muslim world, you see here. Okay? So this gives you the basic trends of Islam in West Africa. Okay, in a nutshell. Because you need to understand this before you go into the actual mujaddid. Okay? Any questions anybody has on this so far? The floor is open for any questions anybody may have. So the area we're talking about, where this mujaddid came from, remember when we looked at Imam al-Ghazali, right? Then you look at the area of Khorasan, and we looked at the area of Tus and you know, the places where he was born, and you know, we looked at the Seljuk Turks, remember, Iraq, Persia, that was his area, right? So this particular area was called Hausa land, Bilad al-Hausa, Hausa. And the Hausas are probably the largest West African group of Muslims. It's called the Hausa, okay? And there are a lot of different groups in them, but Hausa is like the language, okay? And there's also a group that is called the Fulanis. Okay, so this is Hausa land. Okay, so where the circle is there, that would be Hausa land. Remember, Takroa was over there, right? So Hausa land would be here. It's present-day northern Nigeria. That's the reason why Nigerians are so strong in Islam. They have the second largest Muslim body in all of Africa. First is Egypt, and the second is Nigeria. And the majority of the Muslims live in the north, because this used to be Hausa land, but Hausa land spread, it's more than Nigeria. It's parts of Ghana, Niger, and other places as well. So it's a huge territory. Okay? The land of the Hausa. And the other people were called the Fulanis, or the Fula people. And they came from the area of Takroa. They were like a nomadic people. So they were people who, they were nomads, similar to the Turks who moved around with their animals. Their animals here were cows. So they moved around with cows. They're called the Fulani or the Fula, people. And physically, many of them look like present-day Somalis, right? And they're people who travel with herds, and they started over where Takror is, and they moved all the way across into Hausa land. All that region there had the Fulanis or the Fula people. Okay? And you'll see eventually this is where Sheikh Uthman dan Fodio's people came from, the Fula. Okay, so now, what is the setting? You remember the setting in Imam Ghazali's time, you know, the corruptions that had set in, you know, like you see the settings of the people. The setting of Hausa land, and you can think about other parts of the Muslim world. They had what is called the Iskoki belief system. They believed in spirits, like jinns, and they believed that these spirits were in all types of living things. And many religions believe in that as well, that every living thing has a spirit in it. Even in India, there are a group of people called the Jain people. And the Jains will not kill a mosquito. They won't kill a fly, because it's moving, right? So they believe there's a spirit inside of that. Okay? So the Iskoki people also believed in different forms of the spirits. And they believed in the jinns. And the spirits, some of them are huge, some of them are small. Okay? And in West Africa, it's like a flat region in the middle. And the biggest thing you see is rocks, a huge rock, or what I call baobab tree. Baobab tree is thin on the top and wide on the bottom. Okay? So you'll be in the middle of a plain, and suddenly you see this giant rock, or you see this giant tree. And in the summer season, it's all dry. When it rains out, it turns green. This is called savanna. The savanna is not the desert. It's on the edge of the desert. Okay, but it can turn into a desert. Problem now is the savannas are turning into deserts in West Africa. So they used to sacrifice to these spirit gods. And that type of religion you'll find in many parts of Africa and Asia as well, where they sacrifice to the different power forces. The Hindus themselves, they look for power in different things. And they actually will make snake gods, and they even had a god in one time for the rats. Remember that? They actually had a temple for rats. And there was even Ebola. One time, you know, I was trying to fly in a plane, and you know, they said the cheapest flight was Air India, because Ebola was spreading, right? And they found rats running around in the plane because they wouldn't kill the rats, right? So you're in your seat, man, there's a rat running down the bottom, right? And that rat could have Ebola, so they stopped all Air India flights until they contained Ebola. They had to, right? And they said at that time, if you wanted to get a cheap flight anywhere or there, go Air India, man. Because nobody wants to fly. Why? Because the Hindus will not kill the rats. Because the spirit they believe. And they will sacrifice. And you have bad spirits. Okay? And so they will play music and whatnot. And they get, because they want a spirit to come. And the spirit goes inside of, it's usually a woman. And she gets the spirit and she dances around. And then when she gets tired, they talk to her and she talks in a different voice. They call it talking in tongues. Right? And she will tell fortunes, future, all kinds of things. Right? This spirit-based religion. Okay, so this is what they believed in. And so they would fashion their practices, you know, around this, this containing the force. And this is the essence of magic itself, because the magicians, even within the Muslim world, the worst form of magic is when you can control the jinns. Right? And some people, even Muslims, so-called Muslims, they will tell you they can talk to the jinns. They'll control them. Right? And you go to some of them and you say like, I don't like this guy here. Can you put something on him? And they will make a thing and say, put that under his doorstep. Right? He's going to have bad luck. Or he's going to get sick. Or whatever. They have these things. You want to marry this brother? take this powder and put it in his kufi, and he'll fall hopelessly in love. So these type of things, we call it obia in the Caribbean, right? Right? This is what this is. Okay, and that's the root of where it came from. And it's a powerful thing. I mean, this is a lot of details because I actually did my PhD thesis on this, right? So I have to like kind of cut it down for you. But in the area of northern Nigeria, right, this was deeply rooted amongst the people who were living in that area. And the rulers of the area were called the Sarakin. They had kings. Now the Fulani people who were coming over, and another group called Mandingo, they brought Islam to that part of the world first. But the kings, remember the Gao form of Islam, where the king is imam during the day and magician at night, right? So the leaders in this area, they were practicing this kind of Islam. So they were nominal Muslims. This happened in India as well with some of the Mughals. If you study, the Mughals, Akbar. If you study Akbar, his wife was the Taj Mahal, right? Akbar's religion, he mixed Hinduism with Islam. Study Akbar's life. He mixed the two up because his wife was Hindu. And he mixed the two up and he ruled the people because he was a Mughal, Mongols, right? And he had power. But he started, so they were doing the same thing. They worked with the different magicians, and they had, power over their people. The people were like slaves. Okay? And the group that came in, the Hausa were mainly agricultural people. Okay? But the nomadic people who came in, this is the Fulbe or the Fulanis. And these two people need each other. Because the agricultural people, they need the cows because cow dung, right? The manure of the cow is fertilizer. So the cattle will come in, they'll fertilize your land, right? And then also you can get some of the meat, from slaughtering them. And the nomads, they need the plant, the agricultural plant. They need potatoes, they need yams, they need all the plants that come from agriculture. So they work together, right? Generally. All right? So these are the groups that were there. There's the ruling kings called the Masus Sarauta, right? There's the rulers, and they start taxing the people, heavy. And they're supposed to be Muslims. They ignored Islamic law, and they called it jizya, that you're putting on non-Muslims. And the malams, or the scholars, many of the scholars became scholars under the Sultan. The same ones that Imam al-Ghazali was talking against. Right? They started working for the kings. So they had their own set of scholars, similar to today what's going on, right? They have a set of scholars that work for the sultans and the kings, right? And they could do what they want. The position of women. What was the position of women in Hausa land at the time? Okay? They did have a famous woman in the 16th century, Queen Amina, and she was actually a ruler of her section. But generally, the women's status was very low. And some of the Hausa kings, they said he had 1,000, one of them had 1,000 wives. I don't know what he's going to do with 1,000 wives, right? But he had 1,000 wives, right? He's a crazy guy. Also, they have circumcision ceremonies. And female circumcision, and I don't want to go into the details, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a thing called female circumcision. And that is where it's called FGM. And that is where they believe that not only is the man circumcised, but that the woman should be circumcised. And in the extreme form of FGM, and I'm sorry to be so gross with it, but they take the whole genitalia of the woman and they cut it all off, and they just sew it up so there's only a little hole. That's called complete FGM. Okay? And it's still widespread in Somalia and in Sudan and in places. It's a problem. It's not so well known in India, Pakistan, Arabia. Yemenis have a version of it. But it's really on the Nile River and in parts of West Africa, they were doing this. So the Fulanis, some of them were doing the extreme form of FGM or female circumcision. Okay? And the inheritance of a man was by his brother, who would inherit everything, including his wife. So the woman had no status at all. Okay? This is the setting for the coming of a mujaddid, right? And these people claim to be, for the most part, Muslims. Okay? So it's in this background that Sheikh Uthman dan Fodio, rahimahullah, is born. And he, you have to understand another thing to understand this region here, and that is the Timbuktu system. Timbuktu, remember the trade routes. Timbuktu was a great center of learning. It was right below the Sahara Desert. And, you know, they used to make a joke about Timbuktu. Like, if you go to Timbuktu, you're getting lost. They say, oh, go to Timbuktu. Which means go get lost, right? That's what the Europeans said, because they couldn't get to Timbuktu. Because for 300 years, no non-Muslim was allowed in Timbuktu. Nobody. Only Muslim could be allowed. And it was a city of the ulama. In the 16th century, they had a place called Sankore University. You see it there. They had 25,000 students in Sankore University. In that city, in the 16th century, every man, woman, and child in the city was literate in Arabic. Everybody. They had their own tribal languages, but everybody was literate in Arabic. Okay? Every house had half of the Quran. Every family. It was a city of scholars. And they wouldn't allow anybody in that place unless you have wudu. Right? If you don't have wudu, you're not getting in. And that's how they put it in a nice way, right? And some European scholars, or even the European Geographical Societies, they made an award, who can make it to Timbuktu. So some of them went down there dressed as Syrian Arabs, because you could look like a Syrian. If you learned a little Arabic amongst the Turks or the Syrians, then you play as a Muslim. So I remember reading one account of this European traveler. He goes down there. And then they said, who is this guy? They said, he's a Syrian. And they said, okay, let's wait around his house and see if he makes fajr. Right? So they're waiting for this guy to see if he's making fajr, right? He had to run. He had to run. He couldn't stay in Timbuktu. It was mainly a city of the ulama. Okay? So they had a system called the mulazama system. The mulazama system is where you not only study from your teacher, but you learn etiquettes from your teacher. That comes from the Maliki school of thought. And they say that the students of Imam Malik said the most that they learned from him was not hadith, it was etiquettes. How to live the sunnah. Okay? This is called mulazama system. It's a very interesting system. And the students live with the teachers. So that sometimes the teacher has a business and the students work in the business. So they're earning money as well as, being part of, learning, Quran or learning hadith or whatever it is. And they're transmitting knowledge. So this was the Timbuktu system, right? That's Timbuktu in the red there, right? So it's like the northernmost city as you're coming out the desert. And it became a rich city because the gold coming out the south was actually passing through Timbuktu. So by the 16th century, it was a really rich city. And it had thousands of students. That's the total opposite of what you learn from history, right? You never think black Africans are like this, right? And even other Muslims don't know this, man. If you say to Muslim, go to Timbuktu, like, we were going to film in Timbuktu, and the brother who was going to film with me, he told his people, I'm going to Timbuktu. They said, don't make a joke. He said, no, I'm going to Timbuktu. Because nobody knows what's in Timbuktu, right? It's actually a story of scholars. And if you want to see about Timbuktu, you can go online and you can download a documentary that I did. It's called The Empire of Knowledge, Timbuktu. And you will see, you can download it tonight and you can watch it. Empire of Knowledge, Timbuktu. And I made this when I was living in Cape Town, and it was shown on national broadcasting, SABC, 12 times on national television. This was shown. So you'll see it, and it will show you about Timbuktu. Great scholars and amazing. So this was like the Harvard University, of Muslims. Anyone who wanted knowledge in West Africa, you go there for your graduate studies. Okay? So that system, and that's what a picture looks like. Of course, after a period of time, when the sea routes opened up, you don't have to cross the desert anymore. You just take a boat around the coast. And then the Europeans attacked and colonialism came. So Timbuktu went down as a city, but there's hundreds and thousands of books left. And that's what people are racing to save the books. That's what my documentary is about, how they're racing to save the books in Timbuktu. So these are some of the studies. Remember Imam Ghazali's, because remember what the Mujaddid is got to be. The Mujaddid's got to be grounded in Islamic sciences, right? So in this system, they study tafsir, hadith, fiqh, and usul. Remember usul al-fiqh? Imam al-Ghazali was really good in usul, right? And they emphasize conduct and governance, how you rule your people, and your akhlaq, your character. The second area is dealing with Arabic grammar. Arabic grammar, rhetoric, logic. Remember Imam al-Ghazali with logic, right? And also aqidah. And they also taught astronomy, history, seerah, mathematics. They taught medicine too. And if you go high, they teach tasawwuf as well. That's the highest spirituality. Remember Imam al-Ghazali, he wanted to reach that part of ihsan. But they would only do that with advanced level students. Could go into the area of ihsan. Okay? And the advanced students would teach. So as you teach and whatnot, and sometimes if you're a really good student, then that's how you get married. You marry from your, either from your teacher or you marry from other people of knowledge. So they form a collective of knowledge. Okay? So Sheikh Usman dan Fodio. Now the word, in their language they say Usman dan Fodio. Remember, many people pronounce Uthman, Osman, like the Ottoman Empire, right? They say Osmanli. They say Osman. But it's really Uthman. So his name in Arabic would be Uthman ibn Fudi. Fudi means a scholar. Uthman, the son of a scholar. They say Fodio in their language means a scholar. Okay? So he was born in northern Nigeria, in Sokoto State. He was born in December 1754. Okay? So his family, Musa Jakolo, they're of a special group called Turadbe. They are Fulani scholars. Futa Toro is present-day Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone. It's in West Africa. It's over there. But they moved from over there into Hausa land. So his father was a scholar named Muhammad ibn Saleh. That was his father. Muhammad ibn Saleh. That's where Fodio, they just say Fodio, like a scholar. His mother was Hawa bint Muhammad ibn Usman. His mother was also a scholar. So both of his parents were ulama. And he studied the Timbuktu system of knowledge. So he came up under this system, right? And so in his educational thing, just to give you an idea, he memorized Quran, of course, from a very young age, fluent in Arabic. And from his Sheikh Uthman Bidu al-Kabawi, these are Maliki books, Ishrinat and the Khulasa. These are all Maliki different books. Muqtasa is the third one, right, under Uthman Biduri. That's Maliki Fiqh. And this person specialized in calling to the good and forbidding evil. Amr bil Ma'ruf. He also studied with Sheikh Muhammad Tanbu, which is the tafsir of Karachi. This is a famous Egyptian, it's a famous North African scholar. Okay? So he became, very heavy. Now, these are the people who influenced him. Right? These are the influence in his life. Ahmed ibn Muhammad al-Amin in tafsir. Hashim al-Zamfari in tafsir. Muhammad ibn Raj ibn Mudibbi in Sahih al-Bukhari. Other scholars, Sheikh Abdul Wahab Sha'arani, he's an Egyptian one, right? Also, Sheikh Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, remember Suyuti, right? Also, Sheikh Abdul Karim Maghili, he is Algerian. Ahmed Zarruq, right? He's Moroccan. I'm teaching that on Friday nights, Ahmed Zarruq's book. Imam al-Ghazali. So Imam al-Ghazali is the Mujaddid of the Mujaddids. So he was influenced by Imam al-Ghazali's approach to things. And Sidi Mukhtar al-Kunti of Timbuktu. And the Kunti tribe was a very famous tribe of scholars, mystics. They would say the highest level of this tasawwuf was the Kunti tribe. Okay? So these are some of the influences in his life. And what's interesting is one of his special influences was Sheikh Jibril ibn Umar. Now, Sheikh Jibril was from a people called Tawarek. If you see West Africa, the men cover usul al-fiqh, grammar, and then he said, if there can be said of me that which is good, a good report, then I am a wave of the waves of Jibril. You remember Imam al-Ghazali, right? He was influenced by, the great scholar, right? The Sheikh Juwaini, right? In the Nizamiyah. Juwaini gave the basis of Imam Ghazali. And it is from Juwaini's teachings that Imam Ghazali flowered. Okay? Similarly with Sheikh Jibril ibn Umar, he gave him intellectual, moral, spiritual, and ideological training. But the heaviest thing he gave him was tajdeed. He gave him revivalism. Okay? And this is a very interesting point here. And most people do not know this, except for those who study in high level in universities. But by 20 years old, Sheikh Uthman had mastered the sciences. He was faqih, right, by 20 years old. And he was so deep that Sheikh Jibril actually pledged allegiance to him, eventually. Just like Juwaini said, my best student is Imam al-Ghazali. And he wanted him on his right hand. He actually wanted him, he was learning from Ghazali. That's how deep Ghazali was. Okay? Now look at this connection here. You have Sheikh Muhammad Hayat al-Sindhi. He's from the Sindh, that's in Pakistan. He was a teacher of hadith in Medina, in Saudi Arabia, right? He was a great teacher of hadith. Amongst his students was the Mizjaji family and also Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. Remember of Arabia, right? He was one of the students of Hayat al-Sindhi. Because at that time, in the 18th century, revivalism was coming out of Medina and Mecca. Also, there's a group called the Zabidi clan. That's Sheikh Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi. They're Yemenis. Now, look at the interesting connection. From the connection with Zabidi is Shah Waliullah Dehlawi. Remember the next one that we were going to study, right? He was influenced by the Zabidis as well. So all these revivalists are all feeding from the same tree of revivalism that actually came out of Medina. Okay? And it was an approach to revive the Islamic sciences, to purify, away from bid'ah, from innovations, also emphasizing hadith very heavily. This is an approach. So look at the ones who are influenced as well. Remember Sheikh Jibril ibn Umar? He's also a student under here. And who's a student of him? Usman and Fodio. So he's literally connected to other revivalists, like Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, Shah Wali Allah Dahlawi. All of these revivalists in different areas are actually feeding from the same tree of revivalism that was coming out of Medina at the time. And this is a deep connection that a lot of people don't know, especially the connection with West Africa, right? The place they would meet is in Mecca and Medina. You go to make Hajj, Medina, you don't need a visa to stay in Saudi Arabia, right? You know, if you get into a scholarly group or somebody, you stay. Okay? So, what is the Shehu's life? And I want to just give you an idea of his life. Again, this is a course that would normally take a long time, but I'm giving you a general idea of his tajid. Next week, we're going to look at his teachings. Okay? But look at his life. Now, the reason why I emphasize him, I did my whole PhD thesis on this man. I did work in Nigeria. I went to his grave. I met his family. You know, like I specialized in this man. Okay? Why is this? I was doing his teachings in the Jami Mosque. When I was in the Jami Mosque, I was doing his teachings, right? Nobody knew, right? Look at his life. At 20 years old, he began to travel and teach. That's 1774. Okay? So he began traveling. He would give lectures, especially on the public to the weekends. He would lecture to the ulama in Arabic. But he would lecture to the common people in Hausa or in Tamashekh, the language of the Berbers, the Amazigh. He could speak all of them. So he would speak to different groups in different ways. And he would teach the usul, the basic Islamic studies to the masses of the people. Okay? This is his, here's where you see the mujaddid. He corrected bid'ah in his country. He attacked innovations. All the innovations, he went against it, right? He confronted extremism amongst the scholars. He educated and uplifted women. Now this is something which is amazing about him. He was so amazing dealing with the women's situation that, he formed a halaqah for women after Asa. Okay? And he said to the women, if your husband does not educate you in Islam, disobey him and come to my study circle. You know how brave you got to be to do that, right? Especially amongst chauvinistic Muslim men. Disobey him and come to study. And when they complained to him, he said, it's your duty to make sure she has an education. And if she doesn't, she's studying for Allah, not you, man. So he took this position amongst the women. And we'll see more what he did with the women next class, inshallah. He made demands of the kings. He said, free all political prisoners. Now look at him today, what he would be revolutionary today, right? Free all political prisoners. He said, respect the turban. Because they start disrespecting people who wore imamas. They would wear a full turban like this, right? Respect the turban and respect the hijab of women. And he said, lift unjust taxes. Remember the Murabitun, right? Now, when you say lift the taxes, you're really talking revolution now, right? It's like in Egypt, you're talking about, the bread. The reason why most people make revolts is because the bread costs too much. You can do all you want, but when the price goes up on gas or on bread, then people are in the streets, right? So he said, lift the taxes off the people. Okay? He started traveling around. And by 1789, he traveled with 1,000 students. He would travel from place to place. He sits under a tree and 1,000 students, and that's the university for the day. They're just following him, right? And he's teaching 1,000 students. And he's moving from place to place. Okay? He reached such a level of influence on the people that the Hausa kings got jealous of him. Think about our rulers today. And they tried to assassinate him. There's a whole story. They suddenly somebody introduced a gun for the first time because they had swords, so they used the gun, and so nobody knew what it was. So they brought him into the court, and one of your courtiers came. They thought it was a horn or something, and so the guy said, "Shoot it." And they went to shoot it at him, and it backfired and shot the guy. Right? So when the Shehu realized what they were doing, he just excused himself and he withdrew to a town. He withdrew. And there he had a mystical experience. And in this he had a dream, and Rasulullah ﷺ came with turban and with Sahaba and gave him the sword of truth. This is serious stuff, man. He said, "Take this is the sword of truth." And he took the sword in his dream, right? And then he called for hijrah. So he called for all of his students to go to this town, where he was, right? And following this, he withdrew, and then the Hausa kings came. Okay? And they had a battle. It was like the Battle of Badr. They were outnumbered. The Muslims were outnumbered. And they defeated the Hausa kings. Okay? And they continued until they opened up the whole of Hausa land. Hundreds and thousands of square miles. Okay? And he governed his students from the different areas in Hausa land. He gave them a flag. And he said, "You go back and you establish leadership." So they went to all the different areas. So the leaders in all the areas were students of knowledge. And then they ruled this huge 250,000 square kilometers. And they were ruling with Sharia, right? And then once he had got power, look what he does now. He's now the Amir, hundreds and thousands of square kilometers, ruling. Then he said, "My job is done." He said, "You elect a new leader." Okay? So they elected his son, Muhammad Bello, who was actually the greatest scholar. And the Sheikh then spent the rest of his life, he went to his village and he just taught. Remember what Imam Ghazali did too? He went in his village and he just taught people until he died. Because he did not want state power. That is a mujaddid. Right? And his teaching spread far and wide. Spread all over the place. Right? So this is Sheikh Usman then Fodio. Right? And yeah. So anyhow, so this is Sheikh Usman then Fodio. And this is a glimpse, at his life. And there was 150 books at least that people still have that he wrote. Right? And he wrote mainly in Arabic. Okay, and his texts, my PhD thesis at University of Toronto was dealing with his life from 1774 to 1804. That was when he was a student of knowledge in Dawah. He went in the field of Dawah. Is before the jihad. And that's when he influenced the society, what they call in history, social intellectual history. How do you influence people's social life, their intellectual life, right? And I got 37 original books of his in Arabic, and I brought them back here. That's what I had to do for my thesis, right? To analyze his books, and then, bring his program of revival. Okay, and the amazing thing about him, which is different than many other mujaddids that you might study, he wasn't just a teacher, right? He led the revolution, right? And he defeated his enemies. And when he died, what his age was when he died? He was like 63. 62, 63, he died exactly the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Everything is sunnah, right? He's total sunnah in everything in his life. He's an amazing scholar. Amazing. And, like I say, the heaviest part for me is not just the theory, it's what he did. So he taught it amongst the people, and then he implemented it. And he actually showed them living Islam, how to bring it alive within the society, and how to live as a Muslim society. And his people, they governed northern Nigeria for 100 years until the British came, till the colonial period began. And they came with weapons and whatnot, and and they're still the rulers of northern Nigeria. The president, the head of Nigeria, Buhari, he is a Hausa, right? I don't know if you know Nigerian politics, but the Hausas are still the majority in Nigeria. But you don't usually see Hausas. They don't travel outside of their country because they're satisfied with their country. So you don't usually see them. They're very conservative people, and it's very Islamic. It's unbelievable, man. When you go in the areas, 90% of the women are in hijab. That the adhan's called outside. The Quran schools are loaded. They're an amazing, group of people, and they still maintain the teachings of Sheikh Usman bin Fodio. Okay, so floor is open for any questions anybody may have concerning, Sheikh Usman bin Fodio and his life. This is just an idea of his life, and some of the things that he actually did. Any questions anybody has so far? So he is able to, many of his teachings, it's not, he does follow, he's influenced by Imam al-Ghazali. And he's influenced by other great scholars, right? But it is how he implemented it, right? He did it according to his people, the situation of the people in West Africa. So he interpreted that, which is being interpreted from the Sunnah, because that's where Imam al-Ghazali's teachings come from. And he interprets it, in a way that deals with the problems faced by the people, there in West Africa. And this is, this shows how big the Muslim world is. Like, we don't know. If you say to the average Muslim, do you know Sheikh Usman bin Fodio? This man had 1,000 students, man. Everywhere he walks, there's 1,000 students walking in back of him. And they're all memorizing Quran. They're all, they're into fiqh and everything. And, it's amazing. But that's because the Muslims' world is so big. And we learn things in pockets, and we don't understand the other, areas and the things that they actually live. So this is the great, achievements of Sheikh Usman bin Fodio. Floor is open for any questions anybody may have.
It's interesting that, in Guyana, they influenced the Fulanis might have had, because as Guyanese Salvatians, we were depicted as Fulaman.
Exactly.
And so the influence there was still strong.
Because what it is that amongst the Muslims, amongst the African people who were enslaved and the political prisoners who came to the West, 1/3 were Muslims. We have proof of this now. 1/3. And the main two groups, distinct groups amongst the Muslims, was Mandingo and Fulani, or Fula. These are the main two groups. And usually the real hard revolutionaries were the Mandingos. And if you're in Trinidad, especially, if you're wild, if you're too tough, they say, you Mandingo. They'll call you a Mandingo, right? Because that's what the colonial masters. And then the ulama, the scholars, most of them were actually Fulanis. This is amongst the early Africans who came in, who actually had to dig the ground and everything before the cane was planted, right? Who were the first group that came in to cut the bush down and all the different things. And, so that's the reason why the Hindus and other people, they call the Indian Muslims, oh, you Fulla man. Like you're making fun of you. But that is a badge of honor. Because the Fulla were the scholars, man. They were the scholars of West Africa. Sheikh Usman bin Fodio was a Fulla man, right? You say it to most Guyanese, they will laugh, right? Because it's used as an insult. See how they turn things around? Like, oh, go to Timbuktu. See, so they turn it around. And you know what I found out in studying in Deeper Roots, the history there? There was a big slave revolt in Jamaica, right, around 1835 or so. Okay? And they had there were many Jamaicans in Kingston who were actually writing in Arabic, and they were connecting with people in the countryside. And the proof is that this person named Robert Madden, who was a British magistrate, he came to Jamaica when they were changing from slavery into indentured labor. You know, the British changed it from slavery, and then they brought in indentured laborers, right? So he had to oversee this. And he had been in Turkey before, and Syria. So he knew some Arabic, he knew Muslims. And he came across a group of African people having this meeting, and he said, these people are speaking Arabic, man. It's in Robert Madden's report. I put it in my book. And Robert Madden said to them, La ilaha illallah. Right? And they turned to the region of Jamaica, and they had a revolt. It's amazing, man. So this man's teachings reached all the way to the Caribbean. It reached all the way there. This is how powerful he was. You know, so this is an interesting person. And we, of course, we're studying Tajdeed. So, you know, after we look at his life, then next week, inshallah, we will look at his teachings. So I'll take you through some of his books, and you can actually see how he implemented his teachings, what he was actually teaching to people, and you'll see. And it's interesting because many of the things apply to us today from amongst his teachings. Okay? So inshallah, next week we will continue on, and we will look at the teachings of Sheikh Ahmed and Fodio. Have a safe journey home. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay, alaikum salam. Alaikum salam. Take care, man. Yeah, alhamdulillah, I got hit down by this flu, man.
I know. When it gets you, it gets you.
You know, that change of season, man.
Yeah.
My voice was like gone. Totally gone.
Well, I'm glad
Alhamdulillah,
you're back.
yeah, I'm back now, inshallah.
Okay. We're going to be away next 2 weeks, so inshallah.
Inshallah,
when we get back.
you could even see online, inshallah.
Sorry?
Online,
Oh,
we even
yeah,
have
that's
it
true.
recorded, so you
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
Okay?
Jazakallah.
All right, take care. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Alaikum salam. Okay. I'm going to go.